evening and welcome to Middlesex Update. I'm your host, Melissa Hurley, and today we have just a fascinating guest here with us, Bill Foley, who is a native of South Boston, joins us here today on Middlesex Update. And Bill has been teaching diving through the National Association of Underwater Instructors since 1980, but you were telling me earlier that you started diving a little bit earlier than that. You also have some great footage with you today that was taken several years ago at the giant ocean tank at the New England Aquarium. And that, I think, will be very interesting because I'm sure there are many people who are watching our show that have been there to visit, but they never have gotten to see it the way you've seen it. So Bill, at first I want to thank you to Middlesex Update.
Thank you for having me.
And let's get down to the basics. How did you get interested in diving?
Well, I started out actually when I was born and raised in South Boston, as I think you've already touched on. And I think it was instrumental through my mother that used to drag us to the beach daily. Didn't have to do much dragging, actually. And I remember my first mask being one of the funniest conglomerations you'd ever want to see. It actually had these two tubes that came off the top, entered what appeared to be little birds' nests, and inside them were two ping pong balls. The mask completely covered my mouth and eyes. And when you dove, the ping pong balls went flush with the top of the openings and hopefully kept water out. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And I was always testing myself because against the pier that used to jut out and moved further back and did further underwater swims. And I was always fascinated with the ocean because of being born and raised in South Boston. Yeah, great time. It's a great place.
Yeah, it is a great place.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You say you were always dragged to the beach. Were you dragged to the beach on was it January 4th? January 1st, everyone there goes swimming?
Never at L Street.
Participated in that?
Never at L Street. I think if I did, it would be in a wetsuit because the diving in New England, if you're going to enjoy it, if you want to stay in the water and swim among marine life and enjoy it, you need the proper protection, and quarter-inch wetsuit is the way to go.
Well, tell me, where did you do your first scuba dive?
I was diving in 1966. I was in Bermuda in 1966, and I found that Dave McLeod was running a program off his boat, and I had never taken a scuba lesson in my life. And the entire lesson consisted of being on the boat with Dave, and he said, "Don't hold your breath, let's go." So we put the regulator in my mouth, mask on, tank on, looked very, very awkward getting into the water. And when we hit the water, it was just absolutely gorgeous. It was barracuda, ran into one shark at the time, which had no interest at all in us, but we were very interested in swimming towards it. And it was just absolutely breathless. We were diving, it's an interesting story to this because we were diving a wreck called the Constellation, which is in about 40 feet of water off Bermuda. And it went down in 1942, it's a schooner, and they found these glass vials. And they thought that it was germ warfare because it had gone down during that time. And it turns out that it was medicine sealed against saltwater spoilage. But years later, a guy that you may be familiar with named Benchley dove on the same wreck with Teddy Tucker and got the idea to write the book, The Deep. And so it was an interesting first experience with diving.
I can imagine.
And I'd love to go back.
So you didn't go to Bermuda planning to do this, you were
No.
just there on a vacation or what have you, and just
wonderful lady by the name of Jean Doherty, and Jean and I were visiting Bermuda for the first time, and it was a great, wonderful experience.
And so you continued diving then for a few years.
Yep.
Just really as a pastime.
Yep.
And how did you decide that you wanted to become an instructor?
My cousin, my wife and I were living in Randolph, Mass at the time, and she saw an ad to get certified as a diver. And she mentioned it to me, and I started taking classes at the Randolph High School during the winter, trudging through the snow to the pool. And lo and behold, to make a long story short here, the instructor was a gentleman by the name of Alan Boudreau, who is still teaching classes as we speak at Harvard and MIT. And he made mention that he had bought all his equipment from Fred Calhoun.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "That's my cousin." And they said, "What?" I said, "My cousin." And we hadn't seen each other in years. And Fred has been instrumental in teaching divers and teaching other divers to learn how to teach diving to other people, both him and his wife for years now. And so I worked my way up the ranks through dive master and assistant instructor with Alan. And then Fred said, "Well, look, why don't you become an instructor? You know, you like people, you like teaching, you know, why don't you do it?" So I went to Rockport for, I think it was 4 weekends in a row, both Saturdays and Sundays. And we did a combination of paperwork and in-water work, and eventually became an instructor with the National Association of Underwater Instructors, and taught for about 10 years. Yeah.
Where did you teach?
Mostly in Rockport and Gloucester. The open water work was Rockport and Gloucester, and also down in Plymouth, a place called Flag Rock, which is very nice controlled area because people have an opportunity to swim over a soft sandy bottom into an eventual rocky terrain loaded with marine life and vegetation. You know, it's beautiful, beautiful place.
And you know, you even mentioned your the first time you went scuba diving, you thought it'd be something fun and just kind of tried it on the whim. And I would imagine that a lot of people that go and take lessons, maybe not the ones that become serious students, but they see it on TV. I mean, a lot of times in the movies you'll see it, or you know, maybe you're somewhere and you see some type of scuba diving show or something. But I'm sure there are special qualifications to learn diving, and I'm sure that safety really plays a huge role, integral part of diving. How do you get past that with some of your students? How do you get past just the fun with some of your students and, you know, really teach them the importance of safety?
Yeah. The key thing with becoming a diver is that the person be comfortable in the water. If they're not comfortable, and they need to be introduced in a more comfortable way and beforehand to the ocean. Once you've introduced them to swimming with the necessary equipment in a pool, and they find out that they no longer have to be struggling on the surface, but they can be breathing comfortably underwater while they watch people do laps on the surface. It suddenly dawns on them that this might be a really fun activity. And it's also really safe because I'm breathing just as easily as I am when I'm on the surface. And it's a wonderful thing to see them make the transition from being a little bit concerned and worried, you know, as to how this is going to happen in a comfortable way. And it's one of the joys of being an instructor to see that happen, you know. There's very little safety issues in diving. The equipment nowadays is state-of-the-art stuff. Training, if it's done properly, gets people to the point where they're physically kind of able to just handle the basics of diving. You don't have to be in tip-top physical condition. Women who are pregnant dive.
Really?
You know, there's an organization called the Moray Wheels. They're all in wheelchairs.
That's interesting.
It's part of, it's a handicap that doesn't get in their way, and they frequently dive all over. An acquaintance of mine named Rusty Murray has been instrumental in working with that group for many years now.
That's interesting.
And they also dive the giant ocean tank at the aquarium. Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, you must have developed some pet peeves over the years of being an instructor.
Yeah,
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, couples that come in have been one of my pet peeves. And what I mean by that is one of them really wants to do this, and the other one is sort of tagging along to be with them. And I'm always looking at the tag-along person. And you generally have to take the person aside, on the couple aside, and say, look, we have to be honest here. Who honestly wants to learn this activity, you know? And I've always had to look at that closely down through the years. It can be scary. It has been scary when I've seen people put themselves in harmful positions potentially harmful positions where it's not for them.
Right.
You know.
Right. And while we're on the subject, what about sharks? I see you've come into contact with a few.
Sharks are you'll see some footage, a lot of footage, some of it in the giant ocean tank, some of it hopefully from a film called Blue Water White Death. But they have very little interest in people that are underwater. Generally you find that the danger with sharks is if you aggravate them, if you're something that's exhibiting a posture that's a dead and wounded fish, somebody splashing around on the surface. Most of the footage of films that you've seen regarding shark, it takes hours, if not a long period of time of people setting up a scene. For instance, scenes from the movie The Deep, where they have to chum the area for hours just to get sharks to come into the area.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So what they've done is create an artificial environment, something that gets the shark into a frenzied kind of state, and it does a kind of disservice to the shark. They're used in AIDS research. They are an organism that is literally cancer-free, so they've tried to find out if there can be some benefit in understanding why. We eat a lot more of them than they do of us, you know, and they're wonderful to be around in the water, but you have to treat any kind of marine life with respect and keep your distance.
Right.
I made a mistake one time off of Gloucester of reaching down and grabbing the tail of what I thought was a small skate, and it turned out to be a torpedo ray. Sounds formidable, but it isn't.
Okay.
But it was but it had this wingspan of about 7 or 8 feet, which in the water everything is magnified about a third bigger. And it lifted itself off the bottom and turned like a 747 towards me.
Oh, really?
And I started to back up,
Must have been
and I
amazing
said,
to see.
this was a mistake. I'm going, okay, I understand, I'm getting the message. I'm in your space, and I won't aggravate it again. And so...
have you had any unpleasant experiences in your diving?
The thing that bothers me the most, that has bothered me the most, with two instances, both of which that involve monofilament, that were really potentially dangerous. We were in 80 feet of water about an hour and a half out of Rhode Island on a boat with Billy Palmer, and we were heading to a sub-dive on the U-853. And we weren't able to get there. It was a very rough day, and we dove in an alternative wreck, which was a trawler. And I was swimming up the bow and swimming back from the bow, and I saw Alan Boudreau taking pictures in the netting, or near the netting, on the stern. And I looked over, and all this monofilament was wrapped around the back of his tank, okay? And I didn't have a knife with me. And I looked down, and I saw Alan had one attached to his leg, so I reached down and I grabbed it and just gingerly started to cut it away from his hosing and the back of his regulator at the tank. And it wasn't until the end of the dive that we all of a sudden thought of the potential harm that could have caused.
Right.
And the only other time it happened to me was dive with students on Long Pond down in Plymouth, where my feet were so wrapped up in monofilament that I couldn't fin naturally. I had to use a dolphin kick to get back to shore with my students. And when I turned around, it looked like spaghetti squash, completely wrapped around. So it's fishing line in the water, that kind of aggravation. The only thing that ever aggravated me in terms of a marine life was in the giant ocean tank at the aquarium. And it was a turtle whose home I was standing next to. And it reminded me by biting down on my foot that I shouldn't be there. And I had to kick it on its back, and it sort of saucered off. And both of us survived.
So let's talk about the New England Aquarium, and
Yeah.
you have some fascinating footage from there. Tell me a little bit about your experience there.
Well, I was a membership director at the New England Aquarium for a couple of years, and decided it would be terrific to be in the water with them. The Aquarium Dive Club has a routine where monthly they draw names out of the hat of the members, and 2 of them get an opportunity to dive in the giant ocean tank, usually the first of the month. I had decided that I wanted footage from the giant ocean tank, and I made arrangements with Dan Laughlin, who I think is still involved with the aquarium. And we dove probably for about 45 minutes in the older tank, which had a lot more shark, which you'll be seeing here. And it was a lot of fun. It's amazing when you're holding the camera and you're walking up on this group of shark, and all of a sudden they decide to move around, and underneath you, you're wondering, where are they going? You know? But there's a lot more marine life in the giant ocean tank if you just take the time to look closely. You know, triggerfish and barracuda and tarpon, and I was mentioning to you early off camera that this is Boston Harbor water.
Yeah, I found that very interesting. Why don't you just tell it to the folks at home too?
It comes in and is treated obviously to an extent where it won't be harmful to the marine life in the tank. The oxygen, it is actually pumped up to the roof and sent through a system that re-oxygenates it. So it's converted from O2 to O3, makes it a healthier environment for the marine life in the tank. The tank's about 37 feet deep. Temperature in there is about 74 or so degrees. We dive with wetsuits, weight belts, etc. The funniest experience I had was my children were outside the glass looking in.
Oh, watching?
And they didn't recognize Dad
really?
with the mask on. So
They
I just
knew you were going to be. They knew you were going to be in there that day, though.
they accompanied me to the aquarium. So I took the mask off, and I made faces through the glass, and they get the biggest kick out of that. It's really funny if you're diving and it's membership night, because people are all walking around this outside of the aquarium. Now, it's like if you could picture yourself owning an aquarium at home, and you're looking in. Now all of a sudden you're inside and you're part of the exhibit in a sense.
That must be exciting. I'll never forget.
You're looking out of the glass and you're seeing people walking around with beverages and whatever, and you're having a heck of a time inside with the marine life. You know? Yeah, it's a great time.
That's wonderful. You must have really enjoyed working there.
Yeah.
Someone like you who's spent so much time in the water. And
it's a terrific experience. Anytime you're in close contact with marine life, it's hard to describe how joyful it is and how peaceful it is in the water.
Now, do your kids, do they dive also?
No. Love swimming, but they haven't yet gotten the bug in terms of being underwater. I introduced them to it in the swimming pool a couple of times, but they're pretty much doing their own thing right now. Yeah.
Now, you gave me a few notes, and it says to talk about the Navy SEALs. What's that all about?
The Navy SEALs, they were at an underwater show about 3 weeks ago in Boston, and a guy named Hasada, who is the oldest active commander of the SEALs, a particular SEAL team, was giving a presentation, a brief presentation, and it was really interesting. He was on the Apollo 16 recovery mission, and as he described it, he said, I was leaving the helicopter, and it's very difficult to judge the distance from a chopper to the water. And when I hit the water, he had the bejesus knocked out of him. but he kept thinking, this is on national television, you know, I've got to make do. And he I'll tell you the Navy SEAL cry in a minute. He swam over to the capsule, and the capsule was listing out of the water, and his job was to hook up a sea anchor that was out. The hookup was out of the water, and he didn't get it until about the third try. And he got it. The flotation collar is attached. The astronauts come out, and everything is okay. And then he started to think, well, John Glenn's the oldest living astronaut, and he's going up pretty soon. Wouldn't it be great if the oldest active commander in the SEALs was on that recovery mission? And one of the guys turned to him and he said, Jack, they don't land in the water anymore.
Tried to put him in his place, huh?
It was funny. And when he was addressing his comrades in the audience, you know, they're kind of, it's a wonderful thing because they've been through a common experience together.
Right, exactly.
And they go, hoo-yah!
Oh,
you know,
interesting.
it's like, yeah.
I'll remember that. What about women in diving?
Women are probably the best. A lot of guys are going to hate me for this. Some of the best divers that I've ever met.
Really?
If for one reason that jumps to mind is that they're not hung up with the macho image. You know, they use their heads, you know, better. They're much more. I find them much more in control, and they're a joy to be with for a variety of reasons. And they have, like the men in diving, have a variety of interests. Wreck diving, photography, just the marine life. Some of them enter the water with cameras. Some of them put the cameras down and use these two cameras and their legs as zoom lenses, you know, to get closer to the marine life. And as I mentioned to you again, it was off camera. Women who are pregnant will dive.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Although there's a concern about obviously a continuing concern in terms of not doing any kind of deep diving where potential gas. Don't want to get into the physics here, but where it could cause potential damage to the fetus. You know, but exercising, it's a wonderful exercise for women who are pregnant. And, you know, all those women in the audience that are pregnant should take up.
Okay, well, you heard it here in Middlesex Update. But Bill, you are actually a manager over at Ritz Camera.
Yes.
In Boston, and you obviously see many cameras in your day job. And as you were saying, you took a camera down once that I know of when you went diving. What's it like to go down there with a camera or a video camera? Or
the biggest.
Does it become more of a business, do you think, or you don't get to enjoy it as much? Or?
What happens? The common mistake that people make is that not realizing that light tends to penetrate shallow distances in the water column. You tend to lose reds, yellows, and orange real quickly. And unless you bring down an artificial light, you're not going to get the picture you want, the real color that's there.
Right.
One of the joys, absolute joys of diving, is to do a night dive.
Why is that?
And then have students turn out their lights, so it's pitch black. And the only thing that's up there is the moon to the surface. And then turn the lights back on. The reason for that is that light is the artificial source that you're bringing down from the surface. And you shine it on various forms of marine life, and then the color comes bouncing back at you. I remember a sea worm swimming by me one time, and I hit it with a light, and I can't even begin to describe the color that came off it. Diving with a camera is fun, but the footage that we generally see, the mistakes that are made are not properly lit cameras, trying to take pictures too far away from the subject, and they get a lot of green-blue look to the shots.
Bill, tell me about Blue Water, White Death.
It was one of the first very interesting films in regards to sharks and men and women in the water. It was done with Peter Gimbel, Stan Waterman, Ron and Valerie Taylor, who eventually went on to do the underwater footage for the live underwater footage for Jaws. During the filming, they get out of the cages and are swimming amongst hundreds of sharks, all in open water. First time probably ever done. And it's a remarkable footage, and I hope I'm able to get it and use it on the show.
Great.
I think the audience will get a kick out of it.
We only have a few more minutes left,
Sure.
but tell me about this story about you meeting Jacques Cousteau.
Jacques Cousteau was kind of a father figure in diving. We were both at Symphony Hall one night together, and I saw him in the audience, and I'd like to meet him. What would I say to him? And there was a break, and he started to walk in a direction where there were open tables, and I made the best navigation job I ever made.
It's been those diving skills.
And I just got in front of him, and he came walking towards me, and I said to him, I just want to thank you for the start. Thank you for the start. And we shook hands and went our separate ways. And it was a wonderful personal experience I'll never forget. You know.
That's amazing.
Yeah, great time.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, great person.
Well, we're coming to the close of Middlesex Update. I want to thank you for being on the program.
Absolute pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. And you gave us some tips. About the cameras is a great tip. Just about letting it know that diving is so accessible to multitudes of people. That's something else too. And it was really interesting to talk to you. And I think I'll think of you next time I go to the New England Aquarium.
Thanks, Melissa.
But Bill, I want to thank you for being on Middlesex Update. And
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
And for all of you watching, it's been a pleasure once again here on Middlesex Update. We'll see you next month. I'm Melissa Hurley. Good night. Good evening and welcome to Middlesex Update. I'm Melissa Hurley, and today we are here from the Medford Carnival. The carnival was in town April vacation, and we were here to catch it all, as we always are on Middlesex Update. Our first guest tonight is a man who you may not recognize him when you see him, but I'm sure you've read many of his columns. He writes for the Boston Globe, the City Edition. His name is Alan Lupo, and he is a resident of Winthrop. He grew up in Winthrop, and he speaks about his book, which talks all about growing up in Winthrop. Here he is, Alan Lupo. Tonight we are here with a familiar face and a familiar voice to the Boston area. Many of you, I'm sure, have read his columns for many, many years. Alan Lupo from the Boston Globe joins us here today.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being on the program. And Alan you've spent so many years writing short stories and your columns and everything, and this is actually your 4th book, and I don't know how many people know that, but tonight we're going to talk about The Messiah Comes Tomorrow. If we can show a piece of this, it actually has a picture of his mother up here.
Yep, in 1946.
In 1946, and then we have another photo of Al and his father, and he tells me that the landlord is in the...
The landlady is in the background.
In the background.
Yep. And everything's preserved for posterity.
It's funny because, I think you look at the cover of this book, and it's just a book that you could see it, well, it is at Barnes & Noble's, you could see it at any major bookstore,